If there is an overarching theme to this podcast, it is leadership development. That's our broad topic today. You're not going to want to miss it. Welcome to the Remarkable Leadership Podcast. Let's go.
Welcome to the Remarkable Leadership Podcast. We are here each week to help you lead more confidently and make a bigger difference, both professionally and personally. This episode is sponsored by 13 Days to Remarkable Leadership, a free leadership video series based on Kevin's book, Remarkable Leadership. Sign up by going to remarkablepodcast.com/13 days. And now, here's your host, Kevin.
Hey, everybody. Welcome to another episode of the Remarkable Leadership Podcast. Glad to have you today. My guest today is coming to us from the Netherlands. So he gets the Distance Award, at least today. Not for all time, but for today, he gets the award. His name is, he's written a brand new book. I'm going to show you that book right now. If you're watching, there you go. And now I'm going to tell you about this guest and about him. And let me do that now. His name is Alain Hunkins. He is the author of this brand new book, Cracking the Leadership Code, 3 Secrets to Building Strong Leaders. He's a sought-after speaker, consultant, trainer, and coach. Over his 20-year career, he has led over 2,000 groups in 25 countries. His clients include Walmart, Pfizer, Citigroup, General Electric, State Farm Insurance, and none of them are in the Netherlands. IBM, Corp, General Motors, and Microsoft. He has designed and facilitated seminars on numerous topics, including team building, conflict resolution, communications, peak performance, many more. He serves on the faculty of the Duke Corporate Education. He's published many articles on leadership, and today he is our guest here. Welcome, sir. Glad to have you. I love the background of the barnwood on the wall.
Thanks, Kevin. Yes, we got the Dutch house barnwood. Yeah, I've been living over here with my family. We're having a European adventure, but we're going to spend 2 years total. We're on month 19 right now, having a great time. I've got a 16-year-old and a 13-year-old, and we're all learning a ton living abroad. So it's great to be here.
So for those of you that there's no way the rest of you would know, but we're recording this on the 20th of April, 2020. And so the adventure has had a component that you never expected it would have, I suppose. But then all of us are living a similar adventure here in the U.S. during this same time.
Exactly.
So other than your current 2-year journey in Europe, tell us a little bit about what got you here, a little bit about your personal journey, if you would, sir.
Yeah, sure. Happy to. So ever since I can remember, probably maybe 5 years old or something, I've always been fascinated by people. I've always asked the questions, why do people do what they do? Why do some people trust? And why do some people not trust? And what the heck is a 5-year-old asking these deep questions for? Well, I think a lot of it has to do with the fact that I had a fairly unusual childhood. So I was raised by a single mom and my grandmother. Now that part's not unusual, but the unusual part is the fact that both my mother and her mom are both Holocaust survivors. My mother was born in Brussels, Belgium in 1935, just before the start of World War II. And being Jewish, they were then basically hunted. And my mother, from the time she was 7, when Belgium was occupied by the Nazis, she was actually put in hiding through the Belgian underground and spent 3 years living with other families, kind of like a la like Anne Frank being in hiding, but being moved around from place to place. Thankfully, both her and her mom actually ended up being arrested and was liberated from the holding camp, which is where the trains to Auschwitz went. In fact, I saw the documentation. My grandmother, her name is number 181 on the list of the train that was supposed to go to Auschwitz that never went. And so amazingly, they were reunited after the war. But as you can imagine, how that experience shaped their entire worldview. So very low trust, as you can imagine, about things. And also for my grandmother, particularly, just really kind of shell-shocked from the entire experience. I mean, the rest of her family was killed. And so I had a really different and intense experience growing up at home than I did when I was just at a regular New York City public school with my American friends. And so I had a really different experience there. And so I think early on, I was trying to make sense of the experience. Humans, we love to try to make sense of whatever situation we're in. And so that for me was trying to understand what makes people tick. My grandmother definitely did not thrive from the crisis. Other people do. So I was really interested as to why do some people bounce back from things? Why do other people not? And I think that's what got me interested in psychology and human behavior. I actually went to theater school. I actually have a master's in fine arts from an acting conservatory. I studied that for a while, and then got involved in arts and education and teaching leadership and conflict resolution, and then transitioned into working with corporate groups about 25 years ago. And so the common theme under all of that is leadership. And when I say leadership, I'm not talking about a title or a position. I'm talking about a state of mind. It's an attitude. It's a belief that if you are trying to work with anyone else in the world, or even just yourself, to try to get something done, you need to exercise leadership skills. And so that has been the theme that has sort of emerged through this entire long journey.
So while there are so many things, so first of all, everybody who's listening, if you've listened for very long, it's when you hear that kind of a story, as you know why I always ask that question. There are two questions that I ask every episode. That's one of them. The other one comes near the end. And I'm always glad I asked, and never gladder than, how about that, gladder than now. But for all the things that we don't have in common, there's one thing that we definitely have in common, and that is a passion for leadership, a lifelong devotion to understanding it, teaching it, etc. And so here's what I know, and I know that you know this as well, that there's a lot that has been learned about leadership. There's a tremendous amount that's been written about leadership. So why are leaders in general still so average?
You're being nice, calling them average. Yes, all the studies would say that we're actually, average to mediocre. I mean, if you look at 23% of people believe leaders lead well. So that says we have a crisis going on. Why? I think it's interesting because we can try to teach people the tools, right? Here are the tools, like you can connect better, communicate. Those are all good. Their tools are good. But until you adopt the mindset of needing to change, like if you keep thinking that the way you think and believe leaders need to be is good enough, you don't really have a lot of incentive to change. And unfortunately, so many, we'll call them average leaders still are operating with what I'll call an old school playbook. And that playbook was born in the industrial age, where back then in the factory, and there was this real difference where workers were literally the hired hands. They were the labor, and management were the brains who decided what the process of how to move this widget along the widget factory was. And so leadership was born in this fire of command and control, where my job was to tell you what to do, and your job was just to shut up and do it. And it's amazing, that's not the world that we work and live in. And yet, so much of that legacy has been inherited by the current generations. Even though we think we're enlightened people, let's face it, in the moment, it's so much easier to default to, because I say so, that's why. Because I'm your boss, that's why. Because I'm your dad, that's why. It's right, because in some ways, it's lazy leadership. Because when you lean on your position, what you're doing is avoiding the more difficult conversation. What you're avoiding is really an understanding of the person behind the job that needs to get done. And as I think what we're seeing, particularly in the middle of this staying at home crisis, is just at the end of every job is a person. You know, Henry Ford famously said years and years ago about Henry Ford's Motor Company, why is it every time that I want a pair of hands, they come with a brain attached? Well, brains operate based on hearts. And the more that we understand what it is that drives people, the more that we can help them to drive in the direction that's going to serve them and us better. So I think ultimately it boils down to that belief that we carry about what leadership really is.
So you mentioned, I told everybody when we're recording this, and you mentioned the pandemic, and literally this morning I wrote something that gets at one of the things you talk about in the book, which is empathy. You and I agree that empathy is super important. So I have some thoughts about that as it relates to what we can all learn from that in this moment. But first of all, from your perspective, why is empathy such an important part of our habit set as a leader?
Oh my gosh, it's huge. It's maybe the biggest thing. And here's why. Because at its core, like leadership to me isn't a job title. It's not a position. I said that. But what is it? Ultimately, it boils down to, at the tactical level, leadership is a relationship between two people. It's the person who chooses to follow and the person who leads. And the quality of that relationship is based on the quality of the connection between those two people. And what's the most important thing you can do to strengthen that connection? It's empathy. It's showing people that you understand them and care how they feel, because it doesn't matter what industry you're in, what task you have, what business you're in the people business. And so by starting with the foundation of I'm a human, you're a human, I'm trying to lead, you're trying to follow, how can I use this basic humanity to build on top of to do everything we're going to do? See, a lot of leaders get into the role because they were smart and technically skilled at whatever they are, right? I'm a good salesperson, so I'll be a good sales leader. And I understand our customers and I understand our product offerings, yada, yada, right? And that's true in any industry.
Yep.
And while that's true and that's good, so many leaders then think that needs to be what they lead with in terms of their strengths. Like, let me talk about this. Let me focus on this. When they're kind of hovering and focused on the world of content, and what empathy is about kind of underneath is the world of process and understanding relationship, and that we have to put this first. It's not we're going to hang out here forever. We're not saying that leaders need to become clinical psychologists. But what they do need to be is empathic humans that understand that for humans to perform at our best, we have to be in a mental and physical and emotional and psychological state to be able to perform at our best. And so there are things that leaders can do that can facilitate that environment, and there are things that we can do that get in the way. So empathy is one of the key things that facilitates that environment to happen.
I couldn't agree more. And my comment or my observation about what's going on right now, and even if you're listening to this 2 years from now, I want you to reflect back, because we all lived through what we're living in right now. And what I've been telling people for the last month is that not everyone is experiencing this pandemic in the same way. Not even close. And right now it's obvious that that's kind of true when we step back and think about it. So I'm hoping that what people can be doing in this moment is learning to be more empathic, more empathetic than they were before, and hopefully carrying that forward. It's really obvious now, right? Like if you've got a team member who lives alone, their situation is different than someone who's living with their family 24/7 and trying to teach school, right? Like there's a very obvious, huge difference, and they're both still trying to work, and you still have to try to help both of them succeed in their work that they weren't used to doing from home to start with. I mean, we could go on and on and on. The point is there's kind of some obvious things there now, but the fact is no one's ever in the same place we are, right? And we've got to be understanding where they're at. To your point, get at that process piece, and as you said, it's got to be first. You don't stay there. There's still work to be done, but we need to start there. I love the way you said that, so thank you.
Yeah, because Kevin, as you say that, we need to start there, because if we skip that step, basically the central nervous system of the human brain, the way it works is that we get agitated and we can't focus on the job at hand. And what focusing on empathy first relaxes our nervous systems so that people are freed up to be able to go, yeah, it is. Like, for example, I mean, there are a lot of people, you're probably seeing this too, who are all concerned about trying to be professional on Zoom at home, like when they've got kids running around. So I've said, look, dress code is COVID casual. So what that means is, if a kid shows up on your lap, that's fine, because what we're trying to do right now is create some normalcy in a totally abnormal situation. And so the more that we as leaders can do to help people to relax and basically accept them so they can bring their whole selves to work. Right? That's a phrase that we're probably really familiar with. But what does that mean? First, it means acknowledging their whole self so they can bring it to work.
Absolutely. So the subtitle of the book is 3 Secrets. Great word, secrets, right? 3 secrets to building strong leaders. And you really use 3 C words to do that. So I want to dive into a few things about that, but just give people that framework, if you would, please.
Sure, yeah. So the 3 secrets to building strong leaders, that's the subtitle, is there. The 3 secrets are connection, communication, and collaboration. And real simple, and they build on each other. You can think of them as 3 interwoven circles, or I guess, what is it? 3 circles inside circles. There we go. With connection at the heart, building into communication, into collaboration.
So we've talked a little bit about the connection piece as it related to empathy already. Is there any other specific thing there that you feel led to share in this moment?
Yeah, I think that first of all, staying with empathy for a moment, I think as we all hear it, like, oh, care how people feel. I mean, most of us go, I do that. I'm pretty good at that. One of the things that I get into in my research is looking at what are the things that get in our way of being empathetic? Because I think in our heart of hearts, we'd all like to be good people and good humans and reaching out and caring about people. But let's face it, particularly when we're in our fast paced, busy, task oriented, deadline driven, results, got to get them work environments, things get in the way. And so, some things to consider that might be getting in your way of being a more empathetic leader. One is patience. To really listen to someone and understand them and care how they feel probably takes more time than you're used to doing. And so it's one of these places where you need to pivot and go slow for a little while so you can go fast later. Because taking that time to build those strong relationships is going to serve you a little bit later on. So that's one thing that gets in the way. Another thing that gets in the way of empathy is what I'll call the right wrong trap. So many of us have been educated to believe there's a right way and there's a wrong way, and that's it. There's binary thinking, two ways. And if I approach a conversation with a mindset of I'm here to be the fixer, the advice giver, the problem solver, and that's my job as a leader, guess what? I'm going to be listening to everybody through those ears. And I'm only going to hear of, no, that's wrong. No, that's wrong. Got to fix that. Got to do that. As opposed to realizing if I let go of the right wrong trap, maybe I can give people some space and time to figure out their solutions on their own. And I can support them. And if they're completely off base, I can help redirect them on. But the amazing thing is when people take ownership of their own solutions, they have so much more energy to implement and execute those solutions than if we impose them from the outside. So that's just a couple of different examples around empathy.
Let
Another
me just
key
say
piece.
something about
Yeah,
that.
yeah, yeah, sure.
Because if I ask any leader, even a senior leader, about that, because pretty much every leader has a boss, right? Even if you're the CEO, you've got a board, right? So
Yeah.
if you ask people that as a worker, as a contributor, everyone agrees with that. And yet they don't live that as a leader. It's just an interesting observation that I make. Like everyone says, yeah, of course, when I feel ownership of it, I'm more in. And then my question always is, so how are you creating that for your team? And they're like, oh,
Got it. Yeah.
right.
So Kevin,
So if we,
as you're,
so
yeah,
right, it's just such a, you're so correct. You're so absolutely right. And I guess the reason I share that with everyone listening is that oftentimes don't just nod your head and say, man, I agree, he's a smart guy. I'm glad Kevin had him on. But say, okay, what does that really mean to me? And what does that really mean to me about how I'm leading? And it's easy to agree with that. It's much more challenging to get out of the right wrong trap and help create ownership.
oh, completely, completely. And I think that all of us as leaders, all this stuff is easier said than done. And which is why only 23% of leaders are deemed effective. And so I think the willingness for us as leaders, and this is, I think, the courage of leadership is the willingness to hold up the mirror and really take an honest look at what's staring back at you and go, you know what? It's not perfect. And where can I, and to have enough humility and put your ego aside to go, yeah, you know what? I do get impatient at times. You know what? I do fall into that right wrong trap because until you become aware of it, you can't change it. And you certainly can't help anybody else change it.
Yeah, you get no
You
shit.
I have a mentor who always told me, you can't change what you don't notice. So I think that's why the first step of emotional intelligence is self-awareness, right? We have to become aware of how we show up. And I think too many leaders have gotten along because that's hard work. Let's face it. You can say be self-aware, but to do that actual work, you've got to be willing to look at what's coming back, and it can be emotionally painful at times. So that's the work of leadership, though, and you're not going to grow much beyond unless you do some of that basic work.
And it's one thing to say, well, that wasn't my intent. It really doesn't matter what your intent was, right?
Yeah.
It really matters how it shows up to everybody else. But taking that all the way back to the beginning, if we do the work to build the relationship and the trust, your intent will be much more likely understood. So even though I've still got flaws and problems, if we've done that early work,
Mhm.
We have folks who are more willing to say, I know that that's not really what he's trying to do here, even though right now he kind of is acting like a doofus, right?
Well, exactly, because you've put those, I think Stephen Covey used this great analogy, putting those deposits in the emotional bank account, right? You've done that because by showing people that you care about them, you've earned the right where when you screw up, people go, yeah, she or he, they're human. I get it. They're trying. And yeah, so understanding that your intention is not your action and not how you're going to be seen. So yeah, that's a whole piece around connection. I mean, there's also the other piece around connection that we can go into has to do with your credibility. And ultimately your credibility is, do people believe in you? Because as the leader, you are both the messenger, but you're also the message. And so there are some basic things that will either enhance or detract from your credibility. The most basic one, I go through a bunch of these in the book, but most basic one is, are you showing up on time? Because let's face it, timeliness is the easiest thing in the world to measure. You're either there or you're not. And
Yep.
so if you show up on time, you send a very clear message. If you show up late, you're sending a very clear message. And again, it's not about the traffic and, oh my gosh, I had this client meeting with this important client. That's the story. And so we have to realize that everything we do and don't do, everything we say and don't say as a leader says something about us to the people that we're leading. And
And
so we
because
have to
as,
be,
go ahead.
yeah, I was going to say, and we have to be kind of that self-conscious to recognize, are we sending the messages we want to be? Or if not, what do we need to do differently?
Because as I always say, they're always watching, right?
Yes.
And even if they're remote, they're still always watching.
Yeah.
Doesn't really watching is bigger than just eyes, right? You and I
Yeah.
could talk for a long time. I'm very confident. I've got and there's a lot of things that you have said that where we are in 100% agreement. You made the comment early in a natural part of your conversation, which means that we're in exact alignment, where you said having people choose to follow, or whether people are choosing to follow, because at the end of the day, we're only leading if they're following, right?
Yeah.
Um, you talked about it briefly, that you studied theater and all that, and I'm curious what connection, if any, that you see between leading and acting.
Oh, definitely there's a connection for sure. I love this question, Kevin. Yeah, if you think about it, leading is a role. Like we step into the role of leader and then we step out at times. I remember hearing this amazing conversation. I'm trying to remember which US president it was. I want to say it was probably George Herbert Walker Bush, and talked about, when he was the president, everything, he had the Secret Service, like everyone treated him because he was in the role of the president of the United States. And then after he stepped down, like when he was no longer president, I remember going somewhere and getting the styrofoam cup with his name. Like it suddenly was like the role was no longer, it's still him,
It's
but
not
he's not,
him. It's the
it's not
role.
him. It's the role, right? Is realizing that, and the fact is we play roles every day. We play roles as at work as an employee. You're an executive vice president or a regional director. Like you play that role, but you also play the role as father, friend, spouse, child, mother, right? We play these roles. And I think so much of, I like to say leadership is a performing art, because if you think about what the field of acting does, if you go and pay your money to go to see a play or see a movie, you expect to be engaged from the first minute all the way until the end, right? And they take you on this journey where hopefully, if it's a great movie or a great play, that you walk away changed in some way and by just reflecting on the story they're telling. And there's no dead spots, or if they are, you think that's a bad play, that's a bad movie, right? Ideally, you're completely sucked into the entire arc of the performance. And so if we think about performance, like think about going from the performing art of leadership to the science of high performance at work. We're at work, we're trying to get people to perform. And so if you think about what can we learn from performers? Well, one thing is you have to have skills at what you do. You have to have rehearsed what you do, and you need to bring people on and engage them fully. And so I think there's tons of analogies to be able to pull that out. So for example, thinking about as a leader, you're your own instrument. What I mean by that is basically everything you say or do, if you're doing it in person, first of all, comes out through your voice and your body language. And so are you even aware that when you speak really quickly, that creates a different environment than when you take big pauses, right? So just the different impact that the way in which we communicate, how we communicate, completely shifts things with other people. So yeah, the role of performance and the role of leadership, they go hand in hand together for sure.
So before we start to wrap up, I have a couple of, I guess I said that there's only 2 questions I ask everybody, but there's actually 3. Here's one of them. When you're not working with leaders and studying leadership and all those things, what do you do for fun?
For fun, I'm a big fan of nature. So I try to get out and move myself in nature. And depending on what state of my body's in on that particular day, I'll be moving faster or slower. But I try to get out. I mean, here, one of the things I love living in the Netherlands is we don't have a car. We haven't had a car here. Don't miss it for a second, because this culture is completely set up for bicycles. And so my kids bike 25 minutes each way to school in the rain. It doesn't snow here much. So rain, sun, doesn't matter. And there are bike paths everywhere. And we are just a 30-minute cycle that way over to the North Sea. We can go to the sea. We can cycle up to the tulip fields, which are in bloom right now. So just trying to get around. And it's just all the cycle paths are protected. So no one wears helmets here. It's kind of crazy, except for the people on road bikes that are going fast. But everyone else don't wear helmets. And everyone has been trained to be aware of cyclists. So I love getting out and cycling and being out in nature and just outside in general when I can.
So when you're not writing, what are you reading?
Interesting. So I mentioned my story. So since we've been here, I've been doing actually a lot more reading, because we're in the Netherlands now. I am actually reading a book called The Cutout Girl, which was a bestseller a couple years ago, which is a memoir of a girl who was a hidden child, like my mother. She's 2 years older than my mother. And so I've been actually reading, I've been connecting with a lot of the stories around my family and the family history. So this book is called The Cutout Girl, and it's actually written by a man named Bart Van Es. And Van Es is the grandson of his grandparents, his grandmother and grandfather, actually were the ones who kept this girl, who's the main character in the book, in hiding. And he's actually interviewing her at the age of 90 about her experience. So it's a fascinating story, and I'm just getting into that now. So yeah, I try to read fiction, nonfiction, there's lots of things as I go, but that's what I'm currently reading right now.
Perfect. So where can we learn more about your work? Where can people get a copy of the book? Tell us whatever you want to tell us about how people can connect with you, sir.
Yeah, sure, Paul, because I have a funny spelled name, Alain. So I'm going to give you an easier website to go to, which is www.crackingtheleadershipcode.com, spelled the way it sounds. And if you go there, that's the book webpage. And that will take you to everything you need to know about the book, as well as it's a place where you can download the first chapter of the book and get a little preview and get a little taste of what it's all about. And that page will actually link you right to the rest of my AlainHunkins.com website, which I don't need to spell because you've gotten there through the book. And then you can learn all about the other work that I do and my coaching and other services that I offer if you want to be in touch. And also feel free to connect with me on LinkedIn. You can find all that information from my website.
Alain Hunkins, everybody. Thank you, sir, for being here. Before we go, I've got 2 more things, though, everyone. Now I've got a question for all of you who are watching or listening, and that is, now what? What are you going to do as a result? Maybe you felt the tug that you need to think about empathy a little bit more. Maybe you got some ideas around needing to be more patient right now, or maybe whatever it is, right? Maybe you struggle. You realize now that you struggle with the right, wrong deal. And how do you think about that? So whatever it is that you got from today, the question is, what did you get and what are you going to do with it? So hopefully you enjoyed our conversation as much as I think we both did, but it's not enough. The real value comes in you taking some action as a result of what you got. And we, I think, both hope that you do that. Before I go, let me say that if you found this useful, whether this is your first or 200th listen to one of these episodes, you can certainly join our online social media groups to be more involved, to give us feedback, to ask us questions, to suggest guests, all of that. Whether you're on Facebook or LinkedIn, you can do that. Just go to Remarkable Podcast /Facebook or Remarkable Podcast /LinkedIn to do that. Hope you'll do it. And I hope you'll come back next week for another episode of the Remarkable Leadership Podcast. Thanks, everybody.